The morning light arrived without mercy. It fell through the courthouse atrium in severe geometric angles, a cathedral of glass and steel pretending to be neutral. Each ray sliced the air with bureaucratic precision, turning dust into evidence. The building seemed to inhale the people who entered it, strip them of warmth, and exhale them as orderly shapes. Judge Miriam Cole stood before the security checkpoint, waiting like everyone else. She refused the private entrance, always had. Her colleagues thought it a gesture of humility. In truth, it was discipline. She understood power best when she could feel the weight of it pressing down from all sides. The guards nodded, eyes lowering just a fraction too long on her skin before returning to their screens. Their politeness was always edged. Her heels clicked across the marble, the sound controlled, unhurried. Every step declared presence without confrontation. That balance was her craft, visible but not indulgent. She had learned it not from law school, but from years of being read before being heard. The courthouse was awake now, its arteries pulsing with clerks, attorneys, and defendants, all moving with the choreography of a system that mistook repetition for justice. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper, the signature scent of procedural morality. Somewhere down the corridor, a copier groaned, then stopped. Inside her chambers, the light was softer, filtered through vertical blinds that divided it into obedient slats. Her robe hung from a hook by the door, a heavy black garment that absorbed light and with it selfhood. She touched the gavel resting on her desk. The wood was worn smooth at the handle, the head slightly chipped at one corner. She never replaced it. It was imperfect, and so was justice. She sat straight-backed as her clerk entered with the morning docket. "Busy day, Judge Cole," the young woman said. Miriam only nodded. Words this early would disperse the silence she needed to think. Case numbers, assaults, motions, petty theft, a steady heartbeat of minor human failings. Then near the bottom of the list, the one that would draw the press, State Vias Officer Derek Shaw. Assault with intent, excessive force, bodily harm. The file was thick, the edges dog-eared. She ran a hand over it, the paper cool and faintly damp from the clerk's grip. Outside her chambers, the courthouse clock struck 9. A metallic resonance filled the hallways, expanding into the ceilings before fading into the muted hum of daily proceedings. She rose, adjusted her robe, and walked toward Courtroom 3B. The gavel weighed more in her hand than usual. She noticed it, the way one notices an old pain returning before a storm. The courtroom was nearly full. Journalists lined the back rows, their laptops already open like weapons. Shaw sat at the defense table, posture immaculate, eyes sharp beneath a cropped brow. His uniform, though he was suspended, remained perfectly pressed. The badge still glinted on his chest. That detail, that small rebellion, spoke louder than any defense attorney ever could. When she entered, everyone stood. The ritual carried no warmth, only compliance. "Be seated," she said, her voice calm but edged with the authority of practiced restraint. As they sat, she noticed the sound of their movement, a collective exhale. Chairs scraping tile, 100 bodies returning to hierarchy. It was a sound she both commanded and resented. "Calling State versus Officer Derek Shaw," the bailiff announced. Miriam's gaze moved across the room, cataloging. The prosecutor, focused, cautious. The defense, smug in posture, a faint smile of entitlement hidden behind professionalism. And Shaw, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on her as if daring her to falter. He looked at her the way men had looked at her all her life, measuring, calculating, underestimating. She had learned to let that underestimation work for her. It gave her time. The opening statements began. Words filled the room, dry and rehearsed. They were the vocabulary of containment, not truth. The prosecutor spoke of misjudgment and use of force. The defense countered with protocol and fear for his safety. The lexicon of justification. The court reporter's keystrokes became a metronome, steady, precise, devoid of emotion. Miriam listened. She always listened before she ruled. Her face betrayed nothing. But beneath the surface, something ancient stirred. Not anger, not even indignation, but recognition. The story was older than any of them. A black body broken by authority, a white uniform absolved by paperwork, the rhythm of the nation itself. At one point, the defense attorney's voice faltered, and the courtroom fell into a silence that seemed to deepen the air. In that silence, the light shifted slightly. A blade of sunlight crossing Shaw's face, then hers, connecting them in a fleeting geometry of contrast. The moment passed, but she felt its cut. When the witnesses began to testify, the atmosphere thickened. A young man's trembling voice described the night of the beating, the flashlight beam, the shouts, the impact. He kept glancing toward Shaw, who stared back with unbroken stillness. Miriam watched them both, one shaking, one carved in ice. Two versions of truth, unequal in power, sharing the same room but not the same reality. By noon, proceedings paused. The room emptied with the weary shuffle of routine. But Miriam remained seated for a moment longer. The gavel rested near her hand, catching a sliver of light that danced across its handle. She traced the edge of the wood again. It felt heavier still. Outside, she could hear laughter from the hallway and casual, unthinking. A reminder that even within the gravity of law, life moved on unbothered. The court was not sacred ground. It was a workplace for those who could afford indifference. When she finally rose, she caught her reflection in the polished glass of the courtroom door. The robe, the posture, the controlled face. She looked powerful. But power, she knew, was only a costume the system loaned to her until she disobeyed. In the corridor, a janitor mopped silently. The water in his bucket was gray, swirling. He stepped aside to let her pass, nodding once. Respectful, wordless solidarity. It was the only honest acknowledgement she'd received all morning. As she walked toward her chambers, the courthouse lights flickered briefly, the kind of glitch no one reports. The walls hummed with hidden wiring, surveillance, whispers. She paused under the flickering light, its pulse rhythmic, insistent. It reminded her of something she could not yet name. She entered her office again and closed the door softly. The air inside felt untouched but different, charged. On her desk, the gavel waited, unmoving, its shadow stretching long across the paperwork. For a moment, she simply stood there, the morning sun bending through the blinds, painting stripes across her face. Half in light, half in shade, the illusion of balance. Tomorrow would be sentencing, and in that silence, heavy and deliberate, the courthouse seemed to breathe with her, a structure built to contain order, now trembling, imperceptibly under the weight of something older and far more human. The morning arrived colder, not by temperature, but by tone. The courthouse absorbed it, the clipped voices, the slower movements, the way even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum with restraint. By 9 o'clock, the line at security had doubled. The cameras were heavier today, the tripods taller, the whispers sharper. Officer Derek Shaw entered through the side door reserved for defendants under protective escort, though the word protective had lost its meaning. He didn't need protection. Not yet. His confidence was unbroken, his stride steady, his expression fixed somewhere between entitlement and calm disbelief. He was a man accustomed to being obeyed, not judged. The courtroom waited for him. It had been scrubbed of personality overnight, every surface wiped to neutrality, every shadow filled with light. The flags stood motionless behind the bench, their edges stiff, the illusion of patriotism unmoved. When Shaw sat at the defense table, he adjusted the lapel of his suit, the faintest smirk crossing his mouth. The badge, though he'd been ordered not to wear it, lay gleaming beside his right hand, a private relic, a talisman. It caught the light and threw it outward, reflecting the ceiling lamps in perfect sterile symmetry. A mirror to the institution itself, hard, bright, and incapable of introspection. Judge Miriam Cole entered. The room stood. The air seemed to tighten as she took her seat. Her gaze, level and calm, moved once across the gallery, then landed on Shaw. She did not acknowledge him beyond the professional minimum, a formality that, in its precision, carried quiet rebuke. Court is now in session, the bailiff's voice echoed, firm but unsure. The prosecutor began with methodical gravity. The state will demonstrate, she said, that the defendant, Officer Derek Shaw, used excessive and unjustifiable force in the course of duty. The evidence will show an assault conducted not from fear, but from authority, misused and unaccountable. Her words were simple, stripped of flourish and therefore dangerous. The gallery shifted, pens scratched. A cough broke the stillness, small but invasive. Shaw's attorney rose, an older man with a voice trained for televised hearings. His tone carried practiced confidence, the sound of someone long familiar with the architecture of forgiveness. "My client acted under duress," he said. "He was confronted with aggression and responded as trained. The badge on his chest represents service, not perfection." There it was, the word badge, invoked like scripture. Miriam noted the flicker in Shaw's eye as his lawyer spoke it. His fingers brushed the metal at his side, a reflex. She watched, expressionless. The badge gleamed again, almost winking, as if it had its own defense to mount. Witnesses began to testify. The young man, the victim, took the stand. He was smaller than Shaw by half, voice unsteady, suit borrowed and slightly too large. When he spoke, the courtroom seemed to lean in, not out of compassion, but curiosity. His account was clear, but the defense tore at it with surgical precision. Memory questioned, fear reframed as resistance. "Did you raise your hands?" "Yes." "Did you make any sudden movements?" "I turned when he shouted." "So you moved after being told to freeze?" Each question shaved away humanity, reducing the event to fragments that could be legally dismissed. Miriam listened, her jaw set, her hand resting on the gavel though she did not move it. She had presided over hundreds of trials, but this one vibrated differently, an undertone of something older than evidence, older than law. When the defense produced body cam footage, the gallery inhaled as one. The video was grainy, half obscured by motion. The young man's voice, pleading, filled the speakers. Then, the impact, a thud, a shout, a breath cut short. The footage ended abruptly, as if mercy itself had been edited out. Shaw's expression did not change. His lawyer muttered something inaudible, the kind of comfort one gives to men who are certain they'll be forgiven. Miriam allowed a brief recess. The courtroom exhaled, the collective relief of people who had witnessed something intolerable yet familiar. The silence afterward was suffocating. No one spoke to the young man as he stepped down. The gallery's eyes avoided his. When they reconvened, the prosecutor's tone sharpened. "Officer Shaw," she said, "did you believe your life was in danger?" "I followed procedure," he replied, voice steady, rehearsed. "That wasn't the question." He paused, then repeated, "I followed procedure." His lawyer nodded approvingly, the choreography of defense complete. Miriam observed them both. In the faint reflection of her bench, she could see the badge's gleam mirrored in the polished wood. It appeared beside her own reflection, authority facing authority, metal against flesh, a small, accidental symbol of the hierarchy she was meant to navigate. As testimony continued, the language of the courtroom thickened. Citations, protocols, precedents. Words that formed a wall, each brick laid to keep responsibility out. The judge's task was to hold that wall and still find justice behind it. By late afternoon, fatigue had settled into everyone's posture. Shaw leaned back slightly, confidence returning. The young man sat behind the prosecutor now, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor. He looked like someone awaiting a verdict that would determine not a sentence, but his place in the world. The defense called its final witness, a fellow officer, white, 30 years in service. His testimony was loyal and efficient. "He did what any of us would have done," he said. "Split-second decision. You can't teach instinct." The courtroom nodded, some visibly, others inwardly, the institution recognizing itself. When it was over, the gavel struck once. The sound reverberated against the glass walls, sharp and final. Miriam stood. "This court is adjourned until sentencing tomorrow morning." As people rose, Shaw reached for his badge. For a moment, it caught the light again, so bright it obscured his face. The symbol swallowed the man. Miriam watched him pocket it carefully before being led out by deputies. The image stayed with her. That small, polished emblem carried like proof of identity. She thought of how many times she had seen men clutch. There's symbols of power in this room. Uniforms, documents, oaths. Each one convinced that possession equaled innocence. The gallery emptied slowly. The air remained thick, unmoved. The silence had its own gravity now, heavy, collective, unspoken. In chambers, Miriam removed her robe and hung it neatly on its hook. Beneath it, she stood still for a long time. Her reflection in the window merged with the city beyond. Tall buildings, cold steel, indifferent symmetry. She thought of the badge again, how it had gleamed not as metal, but as mirror. It had reflected every light in the courtroom except truth. The courthouse clock struck 5. The sound carried through the walls, down the corridors, into the marble atrium below. A clean, precise echo. The sound of order, not justice. The morning of sentencing carried an unnatural stillness. Even the light seemed cautious, filtered thin through the courthouse windows as though reluctant to touch what was about to happen. The corridors were quieter than usual, the hush not of respect but anticipation. News crews gathered like carrion birds outside the glass doors, their cameras trained on the hallway that led to Courtroom 3B. Judge Miriam Cole entered through the main doors, as always. Her face betrayed nothing, her movements deliberate, ritualistic. She felt the courthouse watching her. Every guard, every clerk, every unseen lens. Authority had never been hers to own, only to perform. Today the performance mattered more than ever. Inside, the courtroom was full to its edges. Every seat occupied, every camera light blinking red. The air was dense, expectant. At the defense table, Derek Shaw sat rigid, his lawyer whispering to him in quick, muted tones. Shaw's hands were folded over his badge, though he was not meant to have brought it. The metal gleamed softly beneath his fingers, as if it were listening. When Miriam took her seat, the scrape of chairs filled the room. Court is now in session, the bailiff announced. The words fell flat, swallowed by the tension. Miriam began with the formalities, sentencing procedures, acknowledgments of the jury's findings, the measured cadence of justice rendered through process. Her voice was calm, steady, deliberate, but beneath the surface of her tone, there was gravity. "Officer Derek Shaw," she said, her gaze meeting his directly. "This court finds you guilty of aggravated assault under color of authority." The sentence, he shifted. A quick movement, not yet defiant but restless. His lawyer placed a hand on his arm, whispering something low. Shaw ignored it. "The sentence," Miriam continued, "will reflect not only the harm done to your victim, but the breach of trust you have committed against the office you held." Something in him hardened. The words breach of trust hung in the air like accusation and prophecy. He rose. "Slowly, deliberately, Your Honor," he said. His voice was calm, too calm. "With respect, I don't accept that." The courtroom stilled. Even the hum of the lights seemed to dim. Miriam did not move. "Sit down, Officer Shaw. You will be heard after sentencing is complete." "No," he said. "I will be heard now." The tone wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The kind of weight men use when they have always been obeyed. His lawyer's face paled. Miriam looked at him evenly. "You are out of order." The phrase, so procedural in other contexts, landed like an accusation here. He stepped forward once. The sound of his shoe striking the tile a single, sharp punctuation. "This isn't justice," he said. "This is theater. You people—" A murmur rippled through the gallery. Cameras turned. Miriam's hand hovered near the gavel. "Officer Shaw, that's enough." His lips curled. "You don't get to tell me what's enough." The words were not shouted. They were whispered, intimate, poisonous. Then, without warning, he crossed the final distance. The sound came first, clean, hard, undeniable. An open hand against flesh. The slap echoed across the courtroom like a gunshot. Miriam's head turned with the impact, but she did not fall. She stood there, face still, the mark already blooming faintly across her cheek. The silence afterward was total, the kind that eats oxygen. No one moved. Not the guards, not the lawyers, not the press, though their cameras were still rolling. For a long moment she simply breathed. Her robe absorbed the shock, her posture unbroken. The gavel, still resting on the bench, seemed to tremble in her peripheral vision. Then very quietly she said, "Mr. Shaw, you have just committed a second assault in open court." Her voice was steady, clear. It was not anger that filled the room. It was something colder, the weight of every silent injustice collapsing inward. The bailiff finally moved, too late, grabbing Shaw by the arms. He resisted only for a moment before letting them take him. The badge he had kept clutched in his hand slipped free, falling to the floor. The sound it made was small, a hollow metallic tap, but it reverberated through the room like the echo of the slap itself. Reporters surged forward. Flashbulbs burst. The gallery's collective gasp fractured into whispers, into disbelief, into a kind of awe. Miriam remained still. She lifted the gavel at last and struck it once. The sound merged with the fading echo of the slap, indistinguishable from it. "This court is adjourned," she said. Her words cut through the chaos. Officers swarmed Shaw, forcing him toward the exit. His face was flushed with something between rage and realization. The cameras followed him, the fallen officer, the collapsed symbol. Miriam turned to leave the bench. Her clerk was frozen in place, eyes wide, lips trembling with something that looked like fear. Miriam gave a small nod, not reassurance but command. The clerk moved. Outside the courtroom, the hallway was already alive with noise. The swarm of voices, the rapid clicks of cameras, the sound of boots and urgency. Miriam stepped through it silently, escorted by 2 deputies who kept glancing at her but said nothing. The mark on her cheek darkened with every step. It burned but not with pain. It burned with meaning. In her chambers, she closed the door and stood still. The soundproofing muted the world to a dull hum. On her desk, the gavel rested where she had left it earlier, its edge glinting under the fluorescent light. She reached for it but stopped. Her hand hovered above the wood, fingers trembling for the first time. Then she saw it, on the floor near her chair, a faint reflection in the glass. Shaw's badge. One of the deputies had brought it in as evidence. It lay there, dull now, stripped of light, its sheen gone. She stared at it for a long time. A piece of metal engraved with authority, made sacred by obedience, now no more than an artifact. She turned away, finally sitting, her breathing slow. The silence around her deepened again, but this time it carried weight. Not absence, but reckoning. Beyond the chambers, chaos unfolded. Reporters shouted, officials scrambled, statements were drafted. But in the small, still room, Miriam Cole sat unmoving. Her face was calm, her posture unbroken, the mark across her cheek a quiet testimony. Somewhere deep in the courthouse, a janitor began to sweep. The sound, soft, rhythmic, unhurried, echoed faintly through the vents, merging with the residual hum of the lights. And for the first time that day, the building itself seemed to pause. The slap had not just broken decorum, it had broken illusion. The gavel and the hand had sounded the same, 2 instruments of judgment, one sanctioned, one forbidden, and in the echo between them, the courthouse revealed what it had always been, a monument to control, suddenly forced to confront its own reflection. The courthouse locked itself down before noon, not officially at first, just in behavior. Doors closed faster, conversations shortened, the rhythm of movement in the halls changed, a subtle tightening. By the time the memo arrived from the chief, administrative office, all external communications to be routed through public affairs, the building had already sealed itself, instinctively, like an organism responding to injury. No one spoke of what had happened, not in full sentences. Fragments passed between offices like contraband. He hit her, in open court. Cameras were rolling. She didn't move. Every whisper carried awe, disbelief, and fear. Judge Miriam Cole sat in her chambers, blinds half closed. The mark on her cheek had deepened overnight into a faint bruise, a dark bloom against composure. She had refused medical assistance twice. The deputies had offered to take her statement. She had declined. Statements were what the system used to bury truth in procedure. Her robe hung over the back of her chair, the fabric heavy and still damp at the cuffs. On her desk lay 2 objects, her gavel and Shaw's badge, placed there by evidence control. The gavel gleamed faintly in the filtered light. The badge did not. Its shine had dulled, fingerprints smudged along its face, the engraved number slightly worn. Across the hall, the courthouse hummed with administrative panic. The sound was faint but constant, the buzz of phones, the low rush of air vents, the occasional clatter of a dropped file. Each sound felt amplified by the silence surrounding it. A knock came at her door. 3 short raps. "Come in," she said. Her clerk entered, eyes darting briefly to the bruise, then away. "Judge, They've called an emergency meeting upstairs. Administrative conference room. Chief Justice is on site. Tell them I'm not attending. The clerk hesitated. They said it's mandatory. Miriam looked at her, expression unreadable. Then tell them I'm exercising judicial independence. The clerk nodded quickly and withdrew. The door closed again, sealing in the stillness. Outside, the PR team had taken over the courthouse lobby. Laptops open, phones pressed to ears, language drafted in real time. The phrases were the same as always. Isolated incident. Unfortunate escalation. Under investigation. The architecture of denial was already under construction. Security footage was being reviewed in an upstairs office. An act of futility, since the world had already seen the slap. Someone in the gallery had uploaded the video before the court even recessed. Within an hour, it had reached every corner of the internet. By now, it was playing on national news loops, slowed down, zoomed in, analyzed frame by frame. A system obsessed with control now found itself recorded, dissected, exposed. In the footage, the slap was silent, but you could hear the reaction. The sharp intake of air, the stunned stillness. What the video captured best, however, was her face afterward. Unmoving, unbroken, her gaze fixed forward. The stillness itself had become the story. Back in her chambers, Miriam sat perfectly still. Her desk phone blinked with unreturned calls. The state bar, the governor's office, a national morning show. They all wanted statements, clarifications, the performance of control. She touched the bruise lightly with 2 fingers. It no longer hurt. The swelling had subsided, leaving a dull ache, a reminder rather than a wound. Through the vent above her desk, she could hear voices from the adjacent conference room. The words were indistinct, but the tone was unmistakable. Containment, not reckoning. Optics. Chain of command. Public confidence. Liability. The vocabulary of damage control. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, beyond the blinds, the city stretched in its usual pattern. Glass towers, asphalt arteries, pedestrians moving as though the world had not shifted. The courthouse sat at the center of it all, a monument pretending to be neutral. Her eyes drifted to the ceiling corner, where a small black dome of a camera watched her. She had never paid it much attention before. Today, it felt alive. The eye of the institution, always recording, always observing, now powerless to choose its narrative. She stared at it for a long time. It blinked once, adjusting focus. "I see you," she whispered. The words were not defiance, they were acknowledgement. A low chime signaled an incoming call. She let it ring. The sound filled the room, a steady mechanical pulse. When it stopped, silence returned, heavier than before. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. Time had thinned inside the courthouse, stretched and warped by fear. Finally, another knock. The door opened before she could answer. It was the Chief Justice, himself, flanked by 2 administrators and a PR officer with a tablet. They entered like a weather front. "Judge Cole," he began, tone clipped. "You understand the situation we're in?" "Yes," she said. "We're all aware of your ordeal," he continued, pausing on the word. "However, we must ensure public confidence. It's essential that we demonstrate stability." Her expression did not change. "You mean control," he ignored the correction. "We're asking you to take temporary leave, pending the internal review. Medical leave, if you prefer that framing." Miriam looked past him to the woman holding the tablet. On its screen, she caught a glimpse of herself, her face frozen mid-slap in the viral video thumbnail. "No," she said quietly. The Chief Justice exhaled. "This isn't personal." "It's entirely personal," she replied. "That's what you're trying to hide." He hesitated, the faintest tremor in his voice. "You understand, of course, that this could complicate." She stood, slowly. The room seemed to adjust around her, gravity shifting. "What would complicate it more," she said, "is pretending nothing happened. Pretending it was an incident, not a revelation." The administrators exchanged looks. The PR officer lowered her eyes. After a long silence, the Chief Justice nodded curtly. "We'll be in touch." He turned to leave. When the door closed behind them, the room felt wider, empty but alive with echoes. Miriam returned to her desk and sat. The camera in the corner blinked again, recording. She let it. Her reflection, in the polished wood, showed two objects, the gavel and the badge. She reached for the latter, turning it over in her palm. The metal was cool, lifeless, the emblem of service now stripped of its sanctity. She placed it carefully beside the gavel, their edges touching, law and enforcement side by side, equal in weight, unequal in conscience. Outside, the building murmured with controlled chaos, press conferences, typed statements, security sweeps. Yet within her chamber, silence ruled. The bruise on her face, faintly visible now in the reflection of the window, glowed against the gray afternoon light. It looked like punctuation, the kind placed at the end of a long, unspoken sentence. She leaned back, eyes closing briefly. The hum of the vent, the faint buzz of lights, the mechanical blink of the camera, each sound folded into the same rhythm. Containment, control, silence. But beneath it, something else moved, slow, steady, irreversible. By evening, the courthouse would reopen to the public. Reporters would camp outside, officials would issue statements, and the building would pretend to have learned something. But the footage would keep playing. The slap, the silence, the look on her face, and in every replay the system would see itself, not as victim, not as authority, but as the hand that struck, and the face that did not flinch. The disciplinary hearing was held in a room that had no windows. Its walls were paneled in a shade of gray that neither reflected nor absorbed light. It merely existed, functional and without memory. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper. The table at the center gleamed with a sterile perfection, its surface wiped too often, its order too deliberate. Officer Derek Shaw sat at one end, his posture immaculate. His badge was gone, his uniform replaced by a dark civilian suit, yet the residue of authority still clung to him. He wore arrogance like a second skin, creased but unbroken. Across from him, a row of officials in identical suits shuffled their notes. Behind them, the department's emblem hung on the wall, a polished seal depicting blind justice, sword raised, scales balanced. It looked absurd in this light. The chair beside Shaw was empty. It was meant for departmental counsel who had withdrawn minutes before the session began, citing a scheduling conflict. The emptiness remained, a hollow presence. It said everything about the institution it represented. At the far end of the table, Miriam Cole sat straight-backed. No Robin no dies in only presence. The bruise on her cheek had faded, leaving a faint shadow beneath the skin, like a watermark that refused to disappear. Her expression was composed but not neutral. Neutrality was a privilege she no longer offered. The hearing began with ritual language. Officer Shaw, this proceeding concerns your conduct on the morning of— I'm aware, Shaw interrupted, voice clipped. The panel chair, an older man with half-moon glasses, cleared his throat. Then we'll proceed on record. Microphones clicked on. Pens hovered. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a mechanical pulse that filled the spaces between words. The department's lawyer began first. His voice was precise, professional, desperate. While we recognize the seriousness of the incident, we must consider the extraordinary stress our officers face in the current climate. Officer Shaw has served with distinction for 12 years, with multiple commendations. The event, though regrettable, occurred under extreme emotional duress. Duress. Miriam repeated softly, her first word since entering the room. The lawyer turned toward her. Yes, Your Honor. Public pressure, media scrutiny. I'm not Your Honor here, she said. You may address me as Judge Cole. The title was earned, not bestowed. The man swallowed, adjusted his tie. Judge Cole, I meant no disrespect. Of course not, she said. Her tone was even, but the silence that followed was not. It lingered just long enough to remind the room that respect, once withdrawn, could not be negotiated back. They continued. Witnesses testified by formality, brief, procedural, unmemorable. Each statement was sanitized, carefully phrased to contain outrage within acceptable limits. Then came her turn. The stenographer's fingers paused above the keys, waiting. Cameras blinked red. The air itself seemed to brace. Miriam spoke slowly, her voice steady, deliberate. Not for persuasion, but for record. On that morning, she began, this officer struck a sitting judge in open court. Not in confusion, not in panic, but in anger. The act was not spontaneous. It was entitlement made flesh. It was an assertion of hierarchy, not an accident of emotion. Shaw's jaw flexed. He looked down, then up, meeting her gaze with something between defiance and disbelief. "You think you know what it's like?" he said, uninvited. The panel chair raised a hand, but Miriam spoke before he could. "Yes," she said. "I do. To live under judgment, unspoken but constant. To measure every gesture, every word, so it will not be mistaken for defiance. That is what I know. You, Officer Shaw, mistook discipline for weakness. You mistook my restraint for permission." Her voice did not rise. It didn't need to. Each sentence landed with the finality of a gavel. Shaw's lawyer whispered something to him, but he ignored it. "You people always make it about race," he muttered, half to himself. Miriam looked at him, and for the first time that morning, there was something like sorrow in her eyes. "It was never about race," she said. "It was about the illusion that power excuses character. Race only decides who is believed when the illusion breaks." The stenographer's keys hesitated for half a second before resuming. Across the table, one of the officials shifted in his chair, clearing his throat. "Judge Cole," he began cautiously, "perhaps we should—" "No," she said, her gaze never leaving Shaw. "Let him listen." Silence followed. "Thick, suffocating, deliberate," she continued. "I do not testify here as a victim," she said. "I testify as a witness to the truth that this institution has spent decades refusing to see. Every policy, every hearing, every report, all of it designed to preserve itself. You will call this a disciplinary matter. I will call it what it is, revelation." The words hung in the air, cold and perfect. For a moment no one spoke. Even the fluorescent hum seemed to dim. Finally, the panel chair cleared his throat again. "Judge Cole, thank you for your testimony. The board will deliberate and issue a decision within 48 hours. Miriam inclined her head slightly. "You won't need that long." She stood, her chair sliding back with a clean scrape. As she turned to leave, her eyes passed once more over the empty chair beside Shaw. It remained there, silent, unoccupied, and somehow complicit. The embodiment of absence itself. Behind her, the panel began to murmur again. Procedural language, motions, scheduling, the machinery of order reassembling itself. Shaw sat motionless, the arrogance in his posture finally faltering. When the decision came hours later, it was unsurprising. Termination, immediate and irrevocable. Conduct unbecoming, use of force, violation of oath. The statement was read aloud in the same conference room, in the same tone bureaucrats use to announce weather advisories. Shaw did not look up. His hands rested on the table, fingers twitching slightly, as though searching for the badge that was no longer there. As the room emptied, Miriam remained behind. The reporters had already gathered outside, the story already rewritten into digestible morality. She looked again at the empty chair, now just furniture. Yet it seemed to carry its own gravity, its own silent record of what the system had refused to fill. She walked toward it and paused. "For once," she said softly. "Silence has meaning." Then she turned, leaving the room without another word. The hallway outside was long and white, lined with identical doors. The air smelled faintly of toner and time. The janitor passed her, pushing a cart that squeaked with every rotation. He nodded once, the way men who have seen too much nod. Acknowledgement without intrusion. As she reached the exit, her reflection appeared briefly in the glass, calm, steady, finite. Behind her, the door to the hearing room closed with a click. The echo lingered. Not loud, but absolute. The sound of something ending, not with violence, but with recognition. Morning returned to the courthouse like a cautious visitor. The light was softer now, autumnal, deliberate, slipping through the tall windows and resting on the marble floors with a patience that summer never had. It revealed no scars, no visible trace of what had occurred, Yet something in the air had shifted. Not freer, just clearer. Judge Miriam Cole walked through the security gate as she always did, unhurried, unflinching. The guard, the same one who had been there the morning of the incident, stood straighter this time. His usual nod was replaced by something quieter, more deliberate, respect without words. Her heels made a measured rhythm on the tile, the same rhythm that had once been drowned by the chatter of attorneys and clerks. Now those sounds dimmed slightly when she passed, not out of fear, but awareness. Reverence, maybe. Or guilt. The world had watched that slap more times than it could count. In offices, in homes, on the endless scroll of phones held inches from faces that wanted outrage but feared implication. Commentators called it a symbol. Institutions called it an incident. The footage had been dissected until every frame became both truth and myth. Miriam never watched it. Her concern was not the legend that followed, but the order that remained. Justice, in its cold procedural form, demanded presence. And so she returned. In her chambers, the gavel waited on her desk. It had been replaced, not because it was broken, but because someone in administration thought she might not want the old one. She had kept it anyway, wrapped in cloth, a relic of unbroken continuity. The new one gleamed, its wood pale and untested. She sat for a moment before court began, eyes tracing the grain of the handle. The weight of it was familiar. Authority, once doubted, reaffirmed not by vengeance but by endurance. At 10 o'clock sharp, the bailiff opened the door. All rise. The courtroom stood, rows of faces, some curious, some sympathetic, a few defiant, watched as she took her seat. The ritual resumed. Paper rustled, pens clicked, voices recited case numbers. The machinery of justice, interrupted but never stopped, began again. The first case was small, a misdemeanor theft, a young man with hollow eyes and cheap shoes. His attorney spoke of desperation, of a job lost, of rent unpaid. The prosecutor countered with statistics. Both spoke neither wrong, both incomplete. Miriam listened. Every word weighed, every silence noted. She saw in the young man's posture the same invisible measurement she had spoken of weeks before. How some lives must prove their humanity before being granted the right to err. She sentenced him to probation, community service and counseling, the closest thing to mercy the system allowed without apology. The gavel came down once. The sound was different than she remembered, not louder, just truer. When the morning docket ended, she stepped out into the corridor. The walls, the same sterile beige, reflected the faint hum of conversation. Clerks passed, avoiding eye contact. Some greeted her softly, others just nodded. Down the hall, a new plaque had been installed. Courtroom C, Judge Miriam A. Cole. The lettering was etched deeper than usual, as if the engraver had pressed harder, ensuring it would not fade. Outside, a protest lingered on the courthouse steps, small, quiet, persistent. Signs held high. Accountability is justice, silence is complicity. Their voices did not reach her chambers, but their presence did. The courthouse cafeteria buzzed with whispers. Her name punctuated sentences like a confession. She knew it, and yet she ate her lunch in silence, methodically, eyes on nothing but the cooling tea in front of her. When she returned to her office, an envelope waited on her desk. No return address. Inside, a letter written in careful handwriting. You didn't flinch. That means something. No signature. No need. She folded it once, placed it in her drawer beside the old gavel. By late afternoon, the sun dipped low, turning the courthouse windows to mirrors. The building itself seemed to study her. The polished floors, the tall columns, the lights humming like a subdued conscience. As she prepared to leave, she paused at the entrance of her courtroom. The seats were empty now, the air still. A faint echo lingered. Not the sound of the slap, not the memory of outrage, but something quieter. Endurance breathing through the walls. She walked to the bench once more, ran her fingers along its smooth edge. The wood was cool beneath her touch, indifferent to everything it had witnessed. She thought of Shaw, not with anger, but with precision. His name had already begun to fade from headlines, absorbed into the slow forgetfulness of bureaucratic consequence. The world had moved on, but the system had not. It rarely did. It simply adapted, learned new words for the same silences. As the janitor entered to sweep, she nodded to him, the same as before. "Evening," she said. He smiled faintly. "Good to see you back, Judge. Good to be back," and it was. Not because it was easier now, but because it mattered more. When she finally left, the courthouse loomed behind her, massive, impersonal, still beautiful in its severity. Its windows caught the dying light and fractured it into shards that stretched across the plaza, like glass laid bare. A city bus rumbled past. On its side, a faded advertisement bore the slogan, "Justice never sleeps." She almost smiled. Justice, she knew, slept often, but it never died completely. She walked toward the edge of the steps and stopped. From this height, the city spread beneath her. Streets, lights, lives. Somewhere below, people still argued about what her act of stillness meant. Some called it bravery. Others called it provocation. Most simply scrolled past. The air was cool. The world kept moving. She reached into her bag, pulled out the old gavel wrapped in cloth, and held it for a moment. The weight had not changed. It never would. Then she placed it back inside carefully. The sound of the city rose around her, distant sirens, heels on pavement, a bus door closing. None of it broke the silence within her. When she finally turned to leave, her reflection appeared faintly in the courthouse glass. The bruise was gone. The resolve remained. The light dimmed. The building stood, and somewhere in that silence, beneath the polished floors, behind the sealed doors, the echo of order continued, reshaped but unbroken, waiting for the next voice strong enough to disturb it.